All right, so I'm going to go to configuration. We'll go to gold images. Juan, this is where you guys have already been. And then you said create new, and you gave it some kind of a name that made sense, you know, W8 test or something in the title. You selected something in the list here. I happen to have a Windows 7 that I've already started, so I'm going to use that one. And then I would click next, and it would take me to another screen that would let me finalize this configuration. Once you build this wrapper or this script, there's no gold image yet. So, okay, so under configuration, gold images, this is the screen we're at. To create a new gold image, you hit this blue button, create new. You give it a name, something that would make sense for whatever version of Windows or Linux, a title. You select it in the list from this big list, and then you click next, and it asks you a couple of other things, and it builds sort of a script or a startup point. There's no gold image yet. There's nothing yet. So then the next step is it tells you on that last screen after you click next is it would tell you to log in using the client, tell you to use the login or the management console administrator that you built the gold image with. And since I built it with MCAdmin1, then I can now launch the VERDE client and log in as MCAdmin1, which is what we were doing on your system. And I should have one option there, and since I only have one gold image, it's going to take me straight in. And what this is going to take me into is as if you're building Windows straight away. It's just like you booted up a DVD or an ISO or something of that nature, because we are using an ISO file, and you're going to select the language and all that good stuff, and you're going to click next, and you're going to say install now, and you guys have seen this before. I won't do this again, but this could take, you know, 10, 20 minutes to get that built, and then you're going to want to patch it, and then you're going to eventually install your applications. And when you get the gold image completely built as an administrative author of that gold image, then you're going to shut it down. Now, one of the critical steps in building the gold image is you've got to install the VERDE tools, and that's very easy to do. Once you get to a point where the image or the Windows operating system launches and you're at a desktop, you would just go to the computer file browser and you'll see an attached device out there from VERDE, and there's a batch file that you run called finish batch or finish up or something like that. And that installs the several levels of tools that VERDE needs to manage this gold image. After that's been installed, then it shuts down the gold image, and when it does, then you're able to check in that gold image. So let me cancel that. So then when you come back to here, the status would change, and you'd have a button over here that would be blue that would say check in. You'd click it, and then it would be in a published level like these are. These are waiting to be checked back out to do more editing on them, and that means that they're available for provisioning. So once that gold image has been built, and Robin will spend some time with you to get that done, then you are able to create a couple of other configurations that we need. One of them is called session setting. And there's a couple ways you can do this. If you're going to do a local VERDE account, any one of the session settings that you configure, you're going to define some things about how that desktop is going to function and what resources it's going to have. So the first tab is the System tab, and you're going to tell VERDE, anybody that I assign this session setting, and I point to a specific gold image, is going to have, in our case, 2 gigs of RAM. The user image or the user partition defaults to 2 gig, and you can raise this up to as much as you want, as large or as small as you want, or whatever. 2 is sort of what we use because we don't need to have extremely large user partitions because we're not putting much data out on our demo world. The next thing is the virtual processors. Windows 7 would function very well with 1024 of memory and would function very well with 1 virtual processor. And that would be a low end to a middle or a medium task worker, someone that does occasional email. They use their web browser. They may interact with Microsoft Office tools occasionally and create a document or work on a slide, PowerPoint, or maybe a spreadsheet. But they're not on their computer 6 to 8 hours a day. They're on the phone. They're going to meetings. That's a perfect scenario for a Windows 7 machine that has 1 gig of RAM, 1 virtual processor, just to give you sort of an idea. Security is another tab that you can work with. You can either allow or deny printing, file sharing, and clipboard. Protocol, as you saw, was very important. You need to have SPICE whenever you build an image because we use that to connect to that gold image because Microsoft locks down RDP until you allow it within the gold image. and that would be one of the steps that you would do. We have a published list of things that we recommend that you do, best practices when you build your gold images. USB, if you want that support, you can either enable it, or if you don't want it, you turn it off. And now they can't plug any USB devices into the endpoint that they're connecting, which can be Mac, Windows machines, some type of a Chromebook, a thin client device, or even a machine that has an HTML5 web browser, such as Google Chrome or something. They could even get to their desktop that way. Or you could install on the endpoint, the VERDE client that we already ran, and you saw that earlier. Active Directory is critical if you want to connect machines to Active Directory. If you want to log in as a local user, then you would this configuration would be complete. You'd hit Save, and you would be able to use this local 2048. Now, the third component after the gold image has been built and you've created a session setting is you create a rule within desktop policy. A rule is very simple. It needs to know what user or users or group of users, which gold image, each one of these is a rule, and what session setting do I control that desktop. Now, the reason why we offer session setting, you saw the different things that we can do there. You can leverage the same gold image in several different ways with different user groups. So if you've got a lower end user group, as I explained earlier, that needs to maybe interact a few hours a day on the computer, but they go to meetings and they're on the telephone and those kinds of things. They don't necessarily need to have a higher end configuration for that particular gold image. So we gave them 1 gig of RAM. We could give them one virtual processor, a 5 or 10 gig user partition so the documents can be stored or what have you. But that same gold image, you could create another session setting right here. Could be called, local 1024 or local 4096, and that is our way of knowing that session setting we're going to assign more RAM. Now, it should have had 4 gigs of RAM, which you can see right there, and I think we're giving this particular session setting 2 virtual processors. You could have another one called local 40964, and that could be 4 gigs of RAM with 4 processors. It's whatever the end user is going to need to do their work. And once again, you're leveraging the same gold image, but you're giving 3 different sets of users different levels of resources. So when they launch their desktop, they've either got 1 gig of RAM, 2 gigs, 4 gigs, or whatever you think you need to handle that. Now, if you integrate with Active Directory, like what most customers will do, because the caveat being local is that it relies on a local user to be added into the VERDE user database, and we maintain all of these. We have several local accounts. We also have a user group that Robin put together here somewhere. I'm missing it. I know it's there somewhere. Oh, I got to go to groups. Sorry. There we go. She made a local group called VERDE LOC group, and then she put a bunch of us in that group. So if you do that, then in desktop policy, you can create a rule under the first column that points to that group name. And all of our group names within the desktop policy rules begin with a % sign. Very simple. And it's not upper lower case sensitive. I don't believe. I think that's just for readability. I think it always defaults to the lowercase value anyway. And what Robin set up here for the VERDE local group is she set up a bunch of different Linux desktops and a bunch of Windows desktops. So when anybody in that group logs on locally, they're going to see a menu that's going to list all of those different desktops, just so you understand that. Now, if you want to leverage Active Directory, then your session settings would be similar to our AD for Organization 0. Organization 0 or global is the default environment within VERDE. So if you're not doing multi-tenant, you're not trying to split up management of VERDE with different administrators and different sets of users, maybe across different locations, or you're not an MSP that's trying to sell virtual desktop in the cloud and you need to isolate one company from another, everything you'll do would be Org 0. But if you are doing that, then that's another whole class that we can talk about that covers the organization configuration or multi-tenant. So in our AD Org 0 session setting, the thing that's different is going to be this tab right here. And here's where we're going to define some information about Active Directory. What are we going to give the names of the machines that are going to be joined to the domain? You can give it the prefix name right here. And Robin, I don't know if there's a limit to how many characters, maybe 6, 8, 7,
I
something?
usually try to have people not use more than 5.
Okay, and the reason why we do that is that in order to give a unique computer name to add to the domain, Verde will attach or append a -0001 to -9999. And they'll serialize those computer names as they get added to the domain. The second field, very simple, your domain name, fully qualified. Ours is verde.local. The third is an optional field. If you leave it blank, which you can, then whenever Verde, an end user launches their desktop the first time and they're connected to Active Directory using their Active Directory credentials, and this Active Directory tab has been configured, it will dynamically join that machine to the domain on the very first login. And if you don't specify anything in this third field right here.
So I'm understanding, Jeffrey, that I don't have to log in my golden image on the Active Directory. They will do that for me.
That's correct. We don't want you to join the gold images to the domain. You don't need to do that. We will do that dynamically on the first login, and then from that time forward, anytime that end user connects to their virtual desktop, it'll already be in the domain, it'll already be joined. The connection time on the subsequent connections will take 2-3 seconds. The first time in, it could take a half a minute to a minute because Verde is orchestrating a lot of activity on behalf of Microsoft Active Directory to make that happen and do that dynamic join of the domain. So you'll notice that on the very first login. So if you want to specify an OU within Active Directory where you want these computer names to be added, and I created in our Active Directory domain controller, I created Verde OU. So the parameter is capital letters, OU equal, the name of the OU, and then comma DC equal, the first part of your domain, comma DC equal, the second part of your domain. This has to be typed this way. Very simply. And then the last thing is we need credentials. What account in the domain can we use with the fully qualified user name? In this case, we're using administrator at verde.local, and a password for that account so that we can negotiate these things on behalf of Active Directory, such as creating the machine, adding it to the domain, those kinds of activities, as well as validate the login. So that's the difference between a local session setting configuration and one that will be used to leverage or integrate with Active Directory. Now, the third component we've kind of already shared with you. That's the desktop policy. So once you build your gold image, you create a session setting, then you just put that information in a rule. So to add a rule, you just click Add Rule. You can either define a user, you can define a group of users with a %sign, that would be group of users, or you can define an Active Directory user, J. Borsini at Verde, and I'll explain why I'm saying at Verde, or I could define a group of users like W7 pool users or NComputing. We have one called NComputing users, I think, at Verde. So there's several different things that you put in that user/group field to tell Verde what's the scope of people or endpoints that are going to be able to get the following things. Then the default assignment is gold image, and then you define from a selection which one of those gold images that you built, and then you define session settings. How do you want to bind and control that particular virtual desktop? Do you want to use a local 1024, a local 2048, an Active Directory session setting? You can make as many of these as you need to. You assign it the session setting, and then if you take all the defaults, you just click Save and you're done. And that will write a rule into the desktop policy. In fact, I have a rule I made for myself right here, J. Borsini at Verde, and I'd give myself 3 different desktops, and I'll show you that login. Now, what's the @ Verde? Well, that's critical with Active Directory or with an LDAP server. So under administration, we have an LDAP server definition you need to make. It's just a connection. Think of it as a connection. And it only needs a few pieces of information. The first one is you give it a name. The second one is what's the IP address of that server that's either going to be an LDAP server or a domain controller, Active Directory server. Then you're going to select which type of LDAP. Is it going to be LDAP or is it going to be Active Directory? Which port are you going to use? What's the ID, the login ID or the account that I'm going to use on behalf of Verde to access that server and be able to work with it? and then what's the domain name, and then I need to have the location, the directory pointer within the hierarchy of that LDAP tree or that structure of where to start looking. In my case, DC equal Verde, comma DC equal local. So for the Verde that I created, I'm going to start looking at the top of the tree, and I can look through everything in the domain. If I'm setting a multi-tenant, I can create another record, same server, same Active Directory, same port, same administrative account, but notice that the base DN is different. I'm going to point them down into the tree, into an OU, and from that OU down. So they are not able to get above that OU in the directory, so I can have isolation and protect from each other, if you will. And because I set up multiple tenants, in our case, I've got multiple examples. And you can make as many LDAP server connections as you need. So then once you make the connection, then the login just becomes the user ID @ and then this name. And ours is Verde. So let me give you a real quick example. I'll bring up the client. I'm going to point to the cloud. I did that so I don't have to type in the public IP address. I'm going to log in as my credentials, J. Borsini @ Verde. It tells it it's a domain account. And then my password in the domain. Oops. I'm going to say log in. Remember, I had 3 rules, so I should see 3 desktops. There they are, 1, 2, and 3. Now, if I want to launch my Windows 8, I just select Windows 8, and this will be, let me just show you this real quick so you'll understand why this comes up so quickly. There's users, there's live sessions. This is a way to monitor all of your active connections. So this will be alphabetic order by user. So there's J. Borsini. There looks like there's 2 records out there. So I've got 2 sessions active, a Windows 8 64-bit, a Windows 10 64-bit. They're both disconnected. So what happens when an end user or an employee would log into their desktop and get a session? Typically, when they leave that session, they do what's called a disconnect. Disconnect means that session stays active on the server, kind of in a standby mode. It's taking up the resources of how much memory you assigned them, how many processors, what size disk, and what size system partition that the operating system and all the applications took when you built that goal limit. That's all being cached and it's in a standby mode. So the benefit of that is that when I come back to my client and I select Windows 8 and I click Connect to Desktop, within just 2 or 3 seconds, my desktop will be back up on the screen, and I'll be looking at my desktop. All right, so I did something here. I know what I did. I switched protocols, so it's going to ask me to log in again. So let me do this. Let me disconnect there. That's what the little X does right up there. See, I'm using Spice because we built a gold image. Gold images require Spice. So what I should do when I select it, and a typical end user wouldn't have to do this. I'm switching between administrator mode and user mode back and forth. I would click Options, and I would change the protocol from Spice to RDP. We recommend RDP because when you get into Windows 8.1 and Windows 10, there's a lot of optimization that Windows does within the configuration of a gold image, and we won't have a nice best practices list for that helps you to optimize the video. And if you're doing watching YouTubes and things like that, you want the full motion video and the sound and all that to be accurate. That's how you do that. But you notice how quickly that desktop launched. It didn't launch that quickly the very, very first time I brought this up. It took about a minute or a little less than a minute. So I've got Office 365 installed. I've got Google Chrome. I've got Acrobat Reader. I've got Notepad+. So if I want to launch Word, I just double-click on the icon, and you see how quickly this thing launches. You probably can't tell that I'm not on a laptop straight away versus being on a virtual desktop. So if I were to type, now is the time for all good men and women to come to the aid of their country. You see there's no latency. It's really not much different than just being on a piece of hardware, a laptop. But then I want to remind you that I am sitting in Cleveland, Ohio, in a satellite office over an internet connection going over 1,500 miles to a Verde cloud that's hosted at IBM Bluemix. Just remember that, and you're seeing the performance. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
There's Excel. Look how fast it pops up. So our goal with Verde is to give high-quality, high-user experience virtual desktop. We want things to be persistent. You see how I position these icons? I put them there. They're going to always be there because VERDE makes my user layer partition that's stored on a permanent disk or on the shared storage. It makes that persistent for me. So whenever I log into this desktop, everything's going to be the way I put it. If I were to move this icon over here, that's where it's going to stay. Just to give you an idea. One other feature I want to show you since I've logged into this desktop is you notice there's a couple of icons here, SketchUp and PayrollMate. If I go to my menu and go to Control Panel, and I go into Programs and Features, you're going to see here I've got Acrobat Reader, I've got a connector ID for another piece of software that we integrate VERDE with if a customer wants this. It's an add-on called Liquidware Lab that gives you the ability to manage performance, monitor login times, look to see where there may be bottlenecks on a desktop when one of your users complains. You've got all kinds of visibility on the management server for Liquidware. So I've installed a little component that's needed in the gold image so that it'll signal all that information to Liquidware, and we'd have the ability to monitor that. But I've got Google Chrome, there's Office 365, and there's Notepad+. These components are the base tools and the guest tools that are needed for VERDE to manage this gold image and make it run like it does. But what's not in this configuration are these two apps. So where'd they come from? Well, I'm going to show you. VERDE also offers, and I got to get out of here. There we go. I'm going to fight. There we go. VERDE also has a feature called Application Layers. All right, I'm going to click on that. What Application Layers is it's another feature within VERDE for a customer to prepare a self-runnable application using a tool like Cameo or VMware's ThinApp. And what you do is both of those tools take snapshots, a before and an after. So how you do this is I launch a very pristine Windows 7 32-bit gold image within VERDE. It has just the basic components built into it. There's no additional applications installed. I want it that way on purpose. Then I launch Cameo or I launch ThinApp, because those would be installed in that gold image as well, that I use just for packaging up these apps. Then once I launch either Cameo or ThinApp, then it'll tell me, go ahead and launch or install your application of choice, and when you're completed, click Finish. And that's all you do. So I went through PayrollMate, I went through Reaper Audio, I went through Notepad+, I went through SketchUp one by one. I finished the installation, I click Finish, and what those products do is they write out a self-runnable .exe file that then I upload right here into the application layer, and then I publish it. So now these applications are available just like a gold image, and they get added into the same rule that I did to provision a desktop. And it's this column called Application Layer right here. So if I scroll down to the rule for my personal login right here, you can see on my Windows 7 I've got Notepad+. Under Windows 8 I've got PayrollMate and SketchUp. And if I go back to my desktop, there's PayrollMate and there's SketchUp. And all I have to do to run those is just click them. What will happen is when I first log into that desktop, those icons won't be there. And then within about 10 or 20 seconds, VERDE will transfer those self-runnable applications from the management console, the storage, over to this desktop. And you notice it runs just like I've installed it locally. Are you seeing that?
Yep, I'm seeing it.
All right.
Yeah, me too.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And here's one called PayrollMate. Let's see if the license expired on this one. Okay, this one was prepared with Cameo. I think I have another one that's prepared with ThinApp, just to give you an idea. And those are free tools that you can use. And the reason why we did this is some customers have asked us, is there a way that I can simplify giving one of my users or a small group of my users an application, but not have to edit my gold image and make a change to add that into the gold image when it only applies to a small number of people? And the way we do that is App Layer. So by not having to edit that gold image and put PayrollMate, or editing that gold image and adding, what was the other one, SketchUp, I can just layer it into those that group of users or those individual employees, and they get the benefit of it without us having to change our gold image. So that's the whole reason for App Layer. I just wanted to show you that. Let me cancel. I don't want to do it back. There we go. Okay, so I think I'm getting through the main things I wanted to show you so that you can get on your way with a gold image, creating session setting, and then creating a policy that's nothing more than a rule that defines these 3 or 4 pieces of information. One other thing that we offer is called desktop pools. I'm just going to share this with you. I don't know if it has any application, but a lot of customers want to have a quick way of launching 5, 10, 20 desktops, maybe that they want to spin up for some kind of employee training, maybe a lab, or maybe an educational venue wants to do some kind of student lab, and they don't want to have each end user having to click and log in the first time and having to endure that 45-second or that 1-minute launch time of the VERDE desktop the very first time they connect. So what you can do is you can create pools. And I made a Windows 7 because it was quick. It's 32-bit. I'm using the AD-org0 session setting, which means that each of these machines are going to be bound to the domain automatically. I'm telling it I want to have 3. You could make that 10, 15, 20, 50, whatever you needed, and I want 30 seconds in between each one. Well, if you're going to do a higher quantity, you might want to have this be 10 seconds in between instead of 30. But what VERDE will do once this is created and saved, then what it will require is a desktop policy rule. So if I go back to desktop policy, I created a rule right here, and I point it to a domain group called W7 pool users, because they're going to be a Windows 7 pool users, and there's the rule, there's the pool that I picked. The only difference is that when I edit this rule, I'll go over here and I'll show you, instead of picking a gold image, I'm going to pick the pool. And it asks me, when I build this particular rule, if I were to add a rule, let's say right here under that same group of users, you'll see the difference. You notice it asks me for an assignment type. Is it a gold image or is it a desktop pool? And that one, when I built it, I said desktop pool. And when I do, then it's going to drop down a list. And if you have multiple pools there, you can select from which one of the pools you want in that rule and save it. And so I already have one. And if I go to my management console and I look at my users and my live sessions, you're going to see 3 machines sitting out here, right here, here, and here. This is where VERDE instantiates those 3 virtual desktops immediately with 30 seconds in between and gets them up and running. And now they're available, and they're just sitting there on hot standby waiting for somebody to pick them. So if I were to change my login, let me just disconnect from here. There we go. And bring up the VERDE client, and I'm going to close it and reopen it because I want to log in as a different user. Typical end users wouldn't do all this. I am doing it because I'm a vendor trying to show you this product. I'm going to log in as JL Borsini and my password. And because I'm a member of that W7 pool users, there's that spin up a pool machine. There was 3 of them. And I'm going to take one of them. And if I say connect to desktop, that machine's already out there. There should be 3 of them already out there waiting to go. So I should get connected just within a few seconds, and there we go. And I'm logging in with my Active Directory credentials. It's not having to join the machine to the domain because it's already been joined when VERDE built that pool and started to launch or instantiate 5, 10, 20 of them. And there they are. Hello? Right-click on Computer, go to Properties, and show you that this is a domain-joined machine. The name of it is NCPC. That's that prefix that we gave it in that session setting, and it appended -008E. So there's the fully qualified computer name. You seeing that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like every time I log in into VERDE, if I have an Active Directory, my workstation will be registered on the Active Directory with a different name.
Yes, absolutely, because remember, in domain world, you cannot have duplicate machine names.
Yeah.
Right? So we have to serialize. That's why we give you the ability within the session settings to define what you want that prefix to be. And you can, like Robin suggested, keep it usually under, 5 characters. I think it could be even longer than that.
Yeah, it can, but, why push your luck?
Yeah. Yeah, and those are all things you can try out. If there's a reason that you have to have 6 or 7 characters, I would just say do an evaluation server, bring it up and set a session setting, and give it, 5, 6, 7 characters. Don't put the dash. We'll add the dash and the numbers from 0001 to F. Maybe it goes to FFFF. Yeah, it probably does. So how many is that? 4 times, I don't know, what's that? 1, 2, I don't even know how many that would be. It's going to be a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. 16 to the 4th, whatever that is. So.
No.
All right. Yes. And now if you got just a couple seconds here, let me show you. I'll go into our Active Directory server real quick. I've got a VPN tunnel up to our location in IBM. Log into my domain controller or my Windows 2012 server. And if I were to bring up Active Directory, which much like what you would do, and if I go to VERDE local, and I go down to you see all the OUs I've built. So instead of having my computers all here in computers, one of them, the server's there. But you see there's no other computers there. If I scroll down to VERDE OU, it should be here somewhere. There it is right there, and open that baby up. You're going to see a bunch of machines that were added into there. And one of them should be that 018 if we did it right. Let's see if I can see it. I have to scroll down. Somewhere in there, and NCPC.
0081?
Oh, 8E was it?
81. It's
81, right there. Okay. So there it is. So that's the first thing that will happen. It will get joined to the domain as it's working its way through that first connection. So I just wanted to show you that. So there's no magic there. Let's see. So we covered gold images. We covered application layers. We covered the 3 things you need to provision a desktop. That's the most important. General settings, there's just some things in there. One of them is licensing. Branch cluster, I can't show you much here, but VERDE does have the ability to build a VERDE server and then change the role to cloud branch. And what that's for is it allows customers to basically place, if you will, an appliance into a closet at a remote location, define the users and connect them to the branch server, so that when that remote location set of users logs on, they get their desktop right from that box sitting on their on-prem at that remote location, and don't have to come across the corporate WAN link back to the data center where VERDE is installed, in the data center. But everything in the data center dictates what gets replicated down to that cloud branch server. So everything still happens at the main data center for a customer. They manage the gold images, they manage their users, they manage their desktop policies, their session setting. But once you define that set of users or that session setting in your rules that you put together point to a branch, then VERDE knows when that end user logs on, they're going to get their desktop from that machine server appliance sitting in the closet at that remote location. And what that does is it reduces the wear and tear across the WAN to support VDI. Does that make sense? Maybe there's an application for you guys down the road for that.
Yeah, sure. That's for the medium to large customers.
Yeah, I can't show that to you in our cloud, but Robin and I have been talking to the management about, maybe it makes sense for us to put a branch in another location. IBM has these global data centers all over the world, and that's something we're talking about doing just so we can show that real time to customers. Yeah. Robin, anything you can suggest that I show these guys while we're on the call?
I think you've got everything pretty well covered.
Okay.
Everything from the management console perspective that they would need at this time. This is fully covered in documentation as well. But it's really good to see it actually in action like this.